right, can you guys hear me okay? No, not at all. Yeah. I have to turn it on.
Yeah, it's not on.
That's a good piece of advice. Where's the on button? Yeah. Oh, okay, maybe that's what it is then. Weird. Okay, all right, cool. Well, can everybody hear me okay? I'll speak loudly.
Yes.
All right. So my name is Austin Knight. I'm a UX designer at HubSpot. Show of hands, how many people here have heard of HubSpot? Oh, okay, yeah, good portion of the room. So if you're not familiar with HubSpot, we are a software as a service company based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I made the flight here for this conference and a few other things. We build marketing and sales software primarily for small to medium-sized businesses. So today I'm going to talk about some interesting user testing stuff. How many of you all here are like really familiar with UX practices? Show of hands. Good. That's like a prerequisite for this. And then how many of you all are familiar with like user testing, qualitative data research? Maybe you've participated in it or you've seen other people do it. Okay. All right. So anybody that's not familiar with user testing, essentially what it is you're going to be taking your product or your website, whatever it is that you're building, and you're putting it in front of users and getting their feedback, letting them use it, get their feedback on the design, and then use that specific feedback to help drive your design forward. So instead of sort of sitting in meetings with your internal stakeholders and letting the company drive the design, you let your users tell you what they want and then deliver that to them. So that's what I'm going to talk about here. As a UX designer, I get to go to a lot of interesting meetings, and I've worked with a fair amount of other designers, and they like to, this is myself included, they like to come into meetings and like start them off with a ridiculous quote or words of wisdom. A popular one that I hear a lot is, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So that was coined by Leonardo da Vinci. That's a nice quote. One that I hadn't heard though was hold my beer. And I thought about going into a meeting with this, and as I was thinking about it, I realized this could be a pretty cool mantra with which I could just push my UX abilities forward. We could live by that on my team. And apparently I wasn't alone in that thought. A few years ago, a guy named Will Dable, that's him, he's an Australian, he published a video on YouTube called The User is Drunk. And it caught a lot of traction. It kind of went like viral in the UX community, which means that it got like 200,000 views. And people talk about it a lot. It's like a really interesting thing to a lot of people, what he discusses in this video, but you can really sum it all up into one core point, and that is that your product, your website, your design, whatever, should be so simple and well designed that even a drunk person could use it. So naturally, whenever people are encountered with a revolutionary idea like this, there are going to be individuals that want to take it entirely too far. And when I watched this video, I quickly realized that I wanted to be one of those people. So that's how I met Richard Littauer. He's a pretty interesting guy. He actually has a website called theuserisdrunk.com. This is a screenshot from his site. You can pay him. His rate has gone up. Now it's $500. I paid him $250. So I got in a little bit early. But you can actually pay him to get drunk and test your website. That's like what he does. So when I realized like, oh my God, okay, I've got like this ridiculous video that says that your design should be so simple that a drunk person could use it, and there's actually somebody willing to do this for me, the first thing that came to my mind was I need to convince HubSpot to pay him to do that on HubSpot.com. And that's exactly what we did. So we got some interesting results. I'll just go ahead and play a quick highlight reel for some of the feedback that came out of this.
HubSpot.com.
Alright, so we said every time, whoa, man, whoa, let's maybe grow your traffic, whoa, highlighted, leads. Everyone sees leads like leads, like the town. This is cool, I like the highlighting, I like the 3 dots. I'm finding it hard to focus on anything else on the page, but whatever. What's email 2.0? I think I'm still on email 1.0. What is this? Willkommen bei der Marketingplattform Nummer 1. You want 11,000. I don't know how to say that in German. Alright, you guys are a really successful site. And this is a lot of footer. When your footer can take up your entire page, you probably have too much footer. So, all I really know about you is that you do marketing, and you help me grow. I just don't think you guys are meant for drunk users. I think you guys are meant for users who are really like, I don't know what kind of user you guys. It sounds like you're meant for large-scale clients who are willing to spend money on buzzwords.
So this hurt. This sent shockwaves through our company. This got like sent all around the company. And the reason that it hurt so much is because it was feedback that we hadn't heard before, but it was really honest and genuine, and in a way, we knew it was actually true. So what did we pull out of that? The first thing that we realized was that we were completely failing to convey the community impact that our company has for the people that it works with. So there are entire communities built around the HubSpot brand, the HubSpot product. We have like these super fans. We just had a conference, or we don't like to call it a conference, it's an event, in September. It's our like annual event. And we had over 14,000 attendees come out to get really excited about this software that we're building. We also were failing to convey the business impact that HubSpot has for the people that work with it. We have over 15,000 customers in over 90 countries around the globe who work with our software and use that software, depend on that software as the lifeblood for their business. And that's just, when you would pull back and look at the design, that's not something that was coming through. But at the same time, a simple search on Twitter would help us to understand exactly how these people feel. This is a person saying hashtag motherfucker about a CRM. That's a piece of software that she's really excited about. These people were really excited about our freemium product, Lead-In, that we launched at Inbound last year. One person got so excited that she decided to impromptu propose to the PM for that product. So none of that stuff, when we look at this page, is really coming out there, and that just wasn't too great. So I'm going to kind of break down some examples for where the weaknesses are and what we were able to learn from that. If we take this section of the homepage, it says, grow your business. So that's great. We're leading with a benefit, and then under it, we talk about how we have so many customers in all of these places around the world. So that's what our homepage said, but if we were to contrast that with what our salespeople actually used when they were talking to prospects, when they were selling the product itself, we would see something more like this. And this is part of a publicly facing page on HubSpot.com. It talks about the specific return on investment that our product will yield for companies that work with us. So they're actually showing people like, hey, this is what happens when you use our software. And we have a calculator. You can like put a bunch of information in there and see what the software is going to do for your company. So that's really nice. If we scroll down the homepage a little bit more, we get something like this. It says inbound marketing and sales software, which is great, but also kind of vague to somebody that doesn't know what inbound marketing and sales software is. So to contrast that again with what the salespeople are using, they would just show people the actual software and say, hey, this is the software itself. This is how you can use it. This is what it does. So there's a difference between what our homepage had and what our users actually wanted. And you could boil it down to a really simple concept of don't tell me, show me. So that was an interesting learning. Some other stuff that we were able to pull out of the test with Richard and additional tests we were actually already aware of. So if you scroll down again to this section, we had this like funnel graphic, and this basically just listed out all of the different products that we have at our company. The important thing to remember about this is that this is a static image. So there's no interactivity, it doesn't take you anywhere or anything like that, but at the same time when we heat mapped it, it might be hard to see this because it's kind of bright in here, but if you see like these purple dots, those are clicks. So we're registering clicks on a static image. That's a little weird. We didn't really intend for that to happen. But if we remember back to the test that we had with Richard, he was actually sitting there clicking on the email 2.0 thing, like expecting it to take him somewhere, and it didn't take him anywhere. So we ran some user tests that were specifically aimed at that. And what we were able to figure out was this isn't some type of weird error that's happening. It's not that users are expecting it to animate or take them out, have something pull out or whatever. It's that they were specifically expecting it to take them to the respective product page for whatever icon it was that they clicked on. Kind of makes sense. So we iterated on that, and we created an interactive product funnel where you could hover over different sections of it and it would animate, and if you clicked on an icon, it took you to the respective product page. Heat mapped it again. Engagement went up, so people were using it more. This is good, because one of the KPIs, key performance indicators, for our homepage is specifically to take people from the homepage to a product page, which is exactly what was happening here. So that was nice. Conversion rate went up. More people were going from the homepage to the product pages. Exit rate went down. They were more engaged. And pain point exhibiting behaviors also went down. So we had less people that were like randomly going from the homepage to the FAQ, or searching for product-related things that should have been obvious on the homepage, or even clicking in random places like what we were seeing with the funnel graphic. So we took this information and we used it to iterate a couple more times, gained some more insights, and we landed on something that looks like this. This is a drastic departure from what you saw earlier. This is what the homepage of HubSpot.com looks like right now. It's live on the site. It's a living page, so it has a lot of dynamic content that will change throughout different times, and eventually depending on what type of a user you are, but this is generally what it will look like. So we take this harsh feedback that we got from Richard when we ran that test with him. That was hard to hear for a lot of people. There are people on my team that put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that design. It was their design. So it's tough whenever you have somebody say something like that and sort of cut you down on something that you're so proud of. But actually, after going through the sort of painful process of realizing what the weaknesses were and then iterating on them, this harsh feedback, it turned into true business impact. And that's what it really represents. So starting with something that might hurt to hear and turning it into results that actually move your company forward. There's a problem though. This like really direct, honest feedback, it's a difficult thing to come by. It's pretty rare in standard user testing scenarios. So that's part of the reason why it was so shocking when we ran the drunk user test. So I want to speak to that a little bit and talk about some of the drawbacks of user testing, where we're falling a little bit short. And more specifically in the context of this talk, I want to speak about remote, unmoderated user testing. So just in case you're not familiar with what remote unmoderated user testing is specifically, this would be an in-person moderated test. This is like the opposite of a remote unmoderated test. So you have two people together. The guy on the left would be the moderator or the designer or whoever is running the test. The girl on the right would be the user that's actually taking the test. And in the middle, we have the product. So the key thing to remember here is that they're both in the same place, and also that while the user is taking the test, if the moderator or the designer or whoever wants to ask a specific question that's a little bit off of the path that they were going on, or if they want to probe into an issue that the user was having or whatever, they can do that because they're right there and it's happening in real time. However, if we were to contrast that with a remote unmoderated test, it would look something more like this. You've got your user and your designer or your moderator or whoever. They're in two separate locations. And you also, as a designer, you cannot prompt the user or probe or anything like that during the test. So what you get is kind of like you create a canned set of tasks and prompts and questions and stuff like that. The user goes through those. It takes anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. And then they ship you something that looks like this. So this is a final remote unmoderated user test. It's basically a video with a recording of the user's screen. You can go back and watch it and then take annotations and all that stuff to figure out what your feedback is. So there are some pros and cons to both of those methods. But I'm going to speak specifically about the drawbacks to remote unmoderated user testing. We can break those down into two different categories, the first of which are inherent drawbacks. These exist simply by way of the fact that remote unmoderated user testing is remote and it's unmoderated. So it's kind of difficult to really do anything about these drawbacks. We can't really circumvent them necessarily, but it's important to be aware of them nonetheless while we're conducting these tests so that we can understand how we need to compensate for them. And the second category is platform drawbacks. This is related to the software and methodologies that we use for remote unmoderated user testing, and they're much easier to overcome. So I'll start with the inherent drawbacks. The first issue that we'll always arrive at is something that I like to call the opinion spotlight. And basically, this is a really simple concept. What it says is that anytime that you ask somebody for their opinion, they're going to give you an opinion even if they don't really have one. And that especially happens with with any form of user testing. So what you'll have is like you're constantly asking the user for their opinion, and they're constantly talking about something that might be on their mind, but in their natural browsing situation, it might not actually stand out to them at all because they wouldn't be thinking about what their opinion of the design even is. Which brings me to the next piece. This is an inherently unnatural environment for a user to use a website or a product or anything like that. Nobody browses the web or uses a piece of software with a screen recorder on, knowing that somebody is going to be watching them. That is happening in remote unmoderated user testing, so they know that they're being watched. This changes the way that they behave a little bit. Part of the way that we help to introduce context to the test and push the user along through the test is by using primers and tasks. So helping them to get into the frame of mind that they need to be for the test, and then also leading them along so that they don't go off path. That's great because it helps us to get the information that we want out of the test and keep it from going off the rails. But at the same time, we are literally telling people how to think and what to do. So again, this goes back to kind of an unnatural usage environment. So next I'll talk about the platform drawbacks. If we were to take like a look at the standard overarching user testing model, basically for remote unmoderated user testing, we would find that all of the big players out there, all of the big platforms, they basically run off of something that looks like this. They'll go to a user and they'll say, hey, we'll give you $10 for 20 minutes of your time. You can do this at home. You don't have to leave the house. Stuff will just randomly pop up on your computer, and you can take these tests and just cash out, right? So that's pretty awesome. It's a job that you can do whenever you're available. You can do it from the convenience of your home. That's a sweet gig. At the same time, if we sort of look at it from a different angle, we'll notice that most of the big players, they have a platform or a panel of users that's greater in size than 1 million people. However, at the same time, nowhere near 1 million tests are taking place at any given moment. So actually, this is pretty good for the designer because what it allows you to do is filter down very specifically in terms of the users that are going to be the research participants that are going to be taking your test. So like if I have a very specific persona that I want to take my test, I can find them. On the other end, what this does is it creates a sense of competition amongst the people that are actually going to be taking the tests, where they know that multiple people are fighting over the bid to take one chance, and more often than not, only a few of them are actually going to get the opportunity to take the test. One way that we like to segment down through users and get more specific with the people that are actually taking the test is through something called screeners, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. But again, because of this sense of competition, we have users that will be trying to predict what it is that we're actually trying to screen for in the screeners and answer them dishonestly sometimes. So It all depends on how well you word the screeners and the questions that you put into your tests. But as an example, if we were to ask somebody, are you a doctor? They would be able to infer that the answer that we're actually looking for is yes, because we want doctors to take our test. So it's very easy to kind of just lie and say, oh yeah, and then take the test and give whatever feedback. That's not too great though, because that actually doesn't supply the designer with the specific type of feedback they're looking for, and they're being deceived into thinking that the person that's taking their test is more qualified than they actually are. One way that these platforms have tried to solve for this is they've introduced user ratings. So you can see these here, 3 stars, 5 stars, whatever. The way that this works is the user will go through the test, the designer will watch the test, record the feedback, and then rate the user based off of how valuable their feedback was or how good they did on the test or whatever. And then this data will then be used to change the odds for each user based on how well they test. So if you get more 5 stars, then you have more of a chance of getting more tests. And if you get 3 stars, your chances are going to go down a little bit, right? If you have an enterprise account with this specific platform, you can actually say, I don't want anybody with less than 4 stars taking my test. So that's nice, but at the same time, to me as a designer, what does this even really mean? Does it mean that the user couldn't follow tasks and they're actually not a good test taker, not somebody that I would want in my test? Or does it mean that they provided really direct and honest and harsh feedback, pissed off a designer, and got a bad rating? I don't really know. But it does come at a bit of a price, where users, when they're taking these tests, have that over their head that at the end of this, I got to get a good rating or else I'm not going to get more chances to take more tests. So, bit of a recap. Unhealthy user competition, ineffective screeners if they're not written the right way, ratings that are kind of useless to the designer, but that also come at the price of dishonest feedback. So, these systems are broken. The systems that we're using for remote unmoderated testing can definitely be improved. But there's a bit of an issue because we actually use these systems to run the drunk user test, which we got a lot of great feedback out of. So that raises the question, what made the drunk user test so great in comparison to all of the other remote unmoderated user tests that we were running? And more importantly, does the user actually need to be drunk in order to supply the level of feedback that we're looking for? And my quick answer for that is no. I believe that with the proper approach to this kind of testing, you can solicit the high quality type of feedback that we were able to get out of the drunk user test, out of any user in any standard testing scenario. So this raises another question. How do you get great feedback out of regular users in normal testing scenarios? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Responsible user testing. I'm going to break this down into 3 sections. The first of which is segmentation. This is how you actually figure out who's going to be taking your test and segment down. Second is the testing process, going through and actually putting the user through it. And the third is the results gathering and distribution process. So how you pull in this data and how you send it out to your team. All right, so we'll talk about segmentation first. Some tips to help you guys with this stuff. The first piece is that you want to know your demographic. This is probably fairly obvious, but you want to make sure that you're delivering your test to people that the test is actually relevant to. You can start with demographics. This is a set of demographics. It's really broad stuff, 18 to 50, 40 to 150K plus, male for some reason, United States, whatever. Whatever it is that you need to filter by from a high level, you can do with demographics. Then you can get more specific by asking multiple qualifying questions of the people that are going to be taking the test. So this is the accompanying set of screener questions to go with the demographics that I just showed you. The first one is it qualifies the person as the general category of individual that you want to be taking the test. So when they answer this question, the only answer that will get them through is marketing. So we're specifically trying to get a marketer for this test. The important thing here is that it doesn't tell you what we're screening for. It could be any of those. And then we can verify that they're actually the type of marketer that we want to be taking our test by asking them a question that only a marketer would really be able to answer. So again, cost per mil is the only one that's actually going to get them through here. The important thing to remember is that all of these other acronym answers are not real. So it's not possible for somebody to just randomly get confused by that. All right, so now I'll talk about the testing portion. The first thing you always want to do whenever you're running one of these tests is run a pilot test. So this is a user test for your user test. You went through this process of creating a prompt, a bunch of tasks, a design to actually test, and then you're going to put a user through it. And they're going to go through that whole process, and then they're going to spit out some results, some qualitative data. However, you may find that when you put your user through the tasks that you created, that they get stumped on task number 3. They just don't really know what it's asking them to do. And as a result, you don't really get the type of feedback for task number 3 that you were looking for. So rather than put all of your users through that set of tasks, have all of them get stumped on task number 3, and then all of them ruin the data for task number 3 in the end. Instead, you just put a single user through it, realize that there's an issue with task number 3, fix that task, and then put all of your users through it and actually get the feedback that you're looking for. So that's what the pilot test helps you to do, is identify areas where you, the test maker, might not have completely made sense. So you'll notice actually up here at the top that there's 5 users that are going through this thing. That's on purpose. The optimal number of users to run a test with is 3 to 5. That's a little bit different than the super, super huge quantitative numbers that you'll see for a split test or a multivariate test or whatever. But actually with qualitative feedback, the best approach is to take, let's say that you have a budget where you can, in a given year, you can test with 250 users. So you've got 250 people that you can run a test with, period. Rather than running your test on one design with all 250 of them and getting a ton of overlapped feedback, the better process would be to take 3 to 5 of them, put them through one design, get the high-level feedback from them, iterate on that design, take another 3 to 5, get the high-level feedback from them, and use it it's a more efficient process. And the majority of your feedback is going to be uncovered with 3 to 5 users. Don't inadvertently lead your users. So whenever you're creating your tasks or your prompt or whatever, you don't want to lead them to commit an action or to deliver a type of response that they wouldn't normally. So a good way to think about this is if you have a job application form on your website, and at the bottom of it you have a button that says Submit. You wouldn't necessarily want to say exactly submit the job application form on the website. Because what that's doing is it's leading the user to find the submit button and to find the form, because you physically said submit and form. So a good way to think about this is no user will actually come to your site thinking, oh, I want to submit a form. But they may come to your site thinking, I would like to apply for a job. That's the action that they're actually trying to complete. So you can frame your task around that. Rather than say, fill out and submit a job application form, you could say, find a job that you like and apply for it, because that's what they're actually trying to do. And then you'll know if they can find the form and submit it on their own. And the final piece I'll talk about is results. Whenever you're collecting qualitative data, you want to pair that data with the quantitative data that you're collecting. Take them, put them together, overlap them, and see if there are areas where you're getting the same feedback from both of the data sets. Those are undoubtedly the greatest areas of opportunity or the biggest pain points for your users. A good way to do this is through something called the rainbow spreadsheet. This thing's it's pretty simple. Basically, on your x-axis, you have the feedback that users are giving, and on your y-axis, you have all of the users that went through the test. If they gave a specific type of feedback, they get a color mark. And this helps you to quantify the actual feedback and prioritize it based off of how common it was. Use tangential and unsolicited feedback. So whenever you run these tests, people are going to go just because you're testing with humans, they're going to go off into different sections of your product or different sections of your site or whatever and provide you feedback on something that you're not even testing for. That can be a little annoying, but the important thing to remember is that all of the feedback that you receive in one of these user tests should be recorded. Even if it's not what you're specifically testing for that day or that moment, it's still important feedback that you should be taking down. With unsolicited feedback, earlier when I was talking about the sort of the pitfalls and drawbacks of remote unmoderated user testing, where users like aren't in their natural environment, all of that stuff goes away when you get unsolicited feedback. Because this is a user that's actually off on their own, using the product, and then coming to you and saying, hey, this is what I think about this. So that's actually really valuable stuff that you want to make sure that you write down. Good way to do that, support tickets. This is a support ticket. Users will be very vocal in support tickets about what they don't like in your product. Check them, if you're a designer, if you're a developer, whoever, check them out. Maintain a relationship with your support organization. Same thing goes with sales. They're having conversations with these people all day long. If your phone calls are recorded, listen to them. If you can get on some sales calls and actually talk to people about what it is that interests them about your product, like why are you thinking about buying this thing? What are the things that are standing out to you? Especially if you're building a website like the site that I build, where I'm trying to get people interested in the product. Those are really important things to know. So recap. I'll leave this up here so you guys can take pictures of this if you're interested. Segmentation, know your demographic, ask those qualifying questions. Testing, run a pilot test. 3 to 5 users is the optimal number. Don't tell the user what you actually specifically want them to do. And for results, pair your quantitative and qualitative data. You can use the rainbow spreadsheet for that. And make sure that you record all of the feedback that you get. I'll wait just one moment. Alrighty. So this raises a question. Now that we know how to run a good remote unmoderated user test, what are the tools that we can use to do this? So I'll speak to that very quickly. These are some of the tools that I think are worth using for remote unmoderated user testing. This is all of it. So your first option are all-in-one platforms, all the way up there in the top left. Usertesting.com, userzoom.com, TryMyUI. These are great products. The key thing to remember about them is that they have a panel and a software. So it's like all in one. You can recruit people through them, and then they're imported right into the software itself, and they take the test. It's pretty automated. With the platform that I use, you'll get results back in under an hour. So that's really good stuff. Drawback to this is that it's expensive, and it is not super flexible or customizable. You can't get really specific with the type of testing that you're doing. So, if you want to do things your own way and sort of break it out and run your own operation, you can use a coupling of screen recorders and participant recruiting. So a lot of different screen recorders. Silverback was specifically built for this stuff. It's in a weird transitional phase right now where I don't even know if the software is available, but if you can get it, that's a great software. Screencastify is a Chrome plugin. It's like a $10 plugin, and it just records the browser window and then the user's face, if that's something that you want. Loop 11 sort of does the same thing. And then some people even use WebEx and Google Hangouts. You can kind of work those to serve as screen recorders for these tests. For participant recruiting, there's a lot of different ways to do that. utest.com is a panel that you can just pull people from. Ethnio and Hotjar they're basically just like plugins for your site that will source people that are live on your website and say, hey, would you like to take a test for a $25 Amazon gift card or whatever. The one drawback to that is that you can't recruit new users because it will only recruit people on your site or in your product. Amazon Mechanical Turk, Craigslist, great way to find local people. And then there's an agency called Nobility that's really interesting to me. And what they will do is they'll match you up with disabled individuals so that you can test your site for specific types of accessibility. Which is a really important thing going through this process, ensuring that your website or your product is fully accessible. If you want blended data that will bridge the gap between quantitative and qualitative, there's also a lot of tools that you can use for that, like Usability Hub, Optimal Workshop, and Inspectlet. So those are the tools. Now that we know the tools and the process, how can we proactively set ourselves up for success by just creating a good design, a design that even a drunk person could use? So there's a lot of ways we can do that. The first thing we want to ensure we do is that we don't design in a vacuum. Listen to your users. Listen to the harsh drunk person's feedback on the other end of the monitor. Don't let your CEO, CMO, or junior designer dictate your design. Let your users. This is an MVP. This is the first Apple computer. Basically, what happened here is Steve and Steve went out and they took this thing that they put together, and they put it in front of actual people and got feedback on it and figured out, hey, what do you guys like about this thing? What do you hate about it? And then they also realized that there's real demand for it, and you can take that information back and iterate on it and create a better product with that feedback. Good design is invisible. So this is a little bit more of an abstract concept, but basically what this says is that the best interfaces are so well designed that users don't even notice them because they're too busy accomplishing what they set out to accomplish. So you think of like the drunk user, very sort of pedantic, easily annoyed. They don't want to be stopped in their process. They want what they want and they want it now. The invisible interface will do exactly that. It won't disrupt them. It won't take them off course. It will help them to accomplish what they came there to accomplish. This is the opposite of an invisible interface or an invisible design or non-disruptive design. What this does is basically it'll load as soon as it loads the content for whatever page you're going to, which is what you're there for. It will then immediately push that content down and be like, hey, you want to sign up for our email list? Which is what like nobody came there for. The problem is that like it works with gathering emails, so we've got to figure that one out. But this is a welcome mat. This is the opposite of invisible design. Don't overcomplicate or oversimplify. So we talk a lot about like simplifying things and ensuring that they're not overcomplicated. What we don't talk about is making sure that they're not oversimplified. So a good way to think about this is that simplicity doesn't necessarily mean less, but rather it means just enough. So it's somewhere in between where you're providing just the amount of information and resources for the user to complete what they need to do, but not necessarily more than is necessary. Sorry if there's any Microsoft people in the room. This is an overcomplicated design. There's a lot of stuff here that's like, this is a word processor, so I'm just trying to write some stuff. So this stuff, it's keeping you from doing exactly what it is that you want to do. This is an oversimplified design, arguably, where users weren't able to actually figure it out what it was. Where's the start menu? Where's the stuff that I actually want to do? Another issue is that this also kind of lacks visual hierarchy, which brings me to my next point, which is utilize visual hierarchy in your design. So design so that the user can immediately deduce what you want them to do when they come into your product, when they come into your website. Make sure that you let them know, hey, this is the thing that you do here. Great way to do this is through a web app called the Drunk User Test tool. You can Google it or go to this short link. And basically what it does is it like takes the fun out of the drunk user test by removing the alcohol. And you can type your URL into this tool and it'll blur it and like move it around like what a drunk person might see. And so this helps you to verify the visual hierarchy of your design. Like looking at this thing, can I still figure out what this designer wants me to do? I'd probably click this blue blob here. Unsurprisingly, that's the sign up button. That is what they want me to do there. So that's just strong visual hierarchy. Organize your information intuitively. So you want to ensure that your information is organized in a way that makes sense to the user so that they know where they are, where they're going, and that they understand how your content is categorized so that it's easy to find. This is a user flow for a mobile app. Basically, what's happening here is the designer is just mapping out how they expect the user to move through the app itself. So this is good because it forces you to actually map that out and figure out, like, oh, this is what it's going to be like for this person to go through this thing. It also kind of sets the expectations for the end results that you're going to be gathering. So just mapping that stuff out helps a lot. Confirm user actions. Thinking about drunk users, they don't always understand when something happened, right? So you know, when you take a drunk person, you want to say something to them once, and then you want to say that same thing to them again so that you can ensure that it was registered in their mind. The same thing goes with anybody that's using your product or your website. You want to give them the feedback to help them to understand that whatever they did was just registered by your system. You can do this through confirmation messages, animations, micro interactions. There are a lot of different ways to subtly tell the user, hey, that thing you just did, we know that happened. This is a micro interaction. This is Reddit's The Button. You can see that when the user hovers over that section, it sort of animates, and then when they click it, the whole thing is like, boom, that just happened. So that's a great example of giving feedback to the user to let them know that their action was registered. I think I'm preaching to the choir with this one, but optimize your site speed, optimize your product speed, whatever it may be. Drunk people, regular people, they're all impatient, right? They don't want to wait for this stuff to work. So run speed tests, compress your images, minify your code. That's all pretty obvious stuff, good stuff that we need to be doing. Interesting number, 3 seconds. This is the amount of time in which you have for your site to load before the average user will leave. That's a short amount of time. $1.6 billion. That is the amount of money that Amazon calculated a 1 second delay in load time would cost them every sales year. That's a lot of money. You can find numbers exactly like this for every major tech organization that's alive right now. Anybody that gets a high volume of traffic has woken up to this realization, and they've done studies on it. A lot of interesting data floating around about that. So, recap. Don't design in a vacuum. Good design is invisible. Don't overcomplicate or oversimplify your design. Utilize visual hierarchy. Organize your information intuitively. Confirm your users' actions. And optimize your site speed. Alrighty. All right, so we got a lot of good information here. We know the tools that we need to use, the processes that we need to use. So now this raises a question: how do I take all of this information and bring it back to my company? And I think that this is probably the most important part of it all, and that's creating a culture of UX within your company. We should all strive to have a culture that is centered around the user experience of whatever product or site that we are building. So the first principle is that everyone is a UX designer. And that's not to say that everybody in HubSpot has the same responsibilities that I do for the site. That's totally not the case. But what it is to say is that everybody should feel a sense of ownership over the product. And what this does is whenever you've got, say that you take a support rep and they're answering support calls, and they get somebody that calls in and they're having a hard time with your product. And they're like, you know, I just don't understand how I'm supposed to do this. Well, naturally, the support rep is going to guide the user through that and help them to complete whatever it was that they were trying to complete. And then they'll log their ticket and that's done, right? When you have a culture of UX where everyone is an owner of the product, the support rep won't stop there. They'll say, wait a second, I am part of this product. I am responsible for this product. I'm going to go up to the design team and actually tell them that this issue happened and that it's something that they can work on, rather than sitting there and saying, well, you know, I'm in support. That's the design guy's fault. He's an idiot. I'll just let him figure that out on his own. So it's creating a real sense of ownership within your organization. Involve your designers and developers from the start, at the kickoff meeting. Bring in your designers. Bring in your developers. Part of the reason for this is so that they can push back and say, hey, that's not a good idea. We shouldn't do that. That's the wrong way to do something like that. But they can also provide innovation, whereas you might be able to come to them with a problem instead of a solution, which I'll talk about in a little bit here, and say, hey, this is the issue that we have, this is the thing that we want to do, and this is kind of the solution that we have in mind. And then the designer or the developer could say, you know what, there's actually this new thing that I've been wanting to try. How about we do that? And it's much better to do that at the very beginning in the kickoff meeting than like 2 or 3 weeks down the road when the stuff finally makes its way to the developer and you've got a bunch of waste that's already occurred. So this is a really efficient way to do things. Fall in love with problems, not solutions. So it's really easy to see what your direct competitor is doing and say, hey, they just implemented this new feature that is really shiny and really cool, and I like it, so let's do that too. What you just did there is you fell in love with a solution to a problem that you weren't even aware of. What problem was that trying to solve for your competition? Do you even know if it was working? You don't know. You just fell in love with the solution. You're importing it directly into your product or your website or whatever. So instead, approach everything from the problem standpoint and say, hey, this is the issue that we have, and then naturally extrapolate a solution from there. This is a solution to a problem that never existed. There was never an empty table that you couldn't set a coffee cup on, and you thus needed a cup holder. Get your hands dirty. So if you're working at a company that produces something, whether it be a software or a tangible good or whatever, make sure that you're using it in your daily life so that you can understand how this thing actually works when you're a user. So if you go to austinknight.com, my personal website, and you pull up Tag Inspector, you'll see that I'm running HubSpot on my website. My site uses HubSpot, and I also help build HubSpot in a way, right? So there I am, like I'm working at this company, but I'm also a user. And that doesn't necessarily mean in any way that I'm an accurate representation of a user, but what it does mean is that it helps me to understand exactly how this product works and put myself in their shoes a little bit more, especially in the case of a product like HubSpot where it's just gigantic. It's a huge piece of software. It can take some time to learn how that actually works. So you want to be using it in your daily life. So recap, everyone's a UX designer. Involve your designers and developers. Fall in love with problems, not solutions, and get your hands dirty. Actually use this stuff. I would wager that if you do that, you can go from collecting feedback that was previously only available with drunk users and getting it out of every single normal user testing scenario that you have in your work. Thank you. On the left is HubSpot's contact info. On the right is my personal contact info. If you go to this short link, it will take you to a page that I built specifically for this talk that gives you sources for a lot of the claims that I made. You can watch the full unedited drunk user test video if you're interested in that. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. It has the link to that web app where you can put your site through it and all that stuff. Yes? I'm sorry? Yeah, the slides are available online. That's correct, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Did you go back to the drunk guy after you made the changes to the...
That's in process. Yeah, I mean, he's a little bit more expensive now, so I'm having to, you know. I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have.